My name is Bodo Sieber, CEO and co-founder of Tagmarshal. I have with me Matt Barksdale, the PGA head golf pro from Pinehurst Resort. And today's expert session is what does the optimal play experience look like and how can your course achieve that? So Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Really delighted to have you.
No, Bodo, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Matt, we all know of Pinehurst for good reasons, and I know that you can probably talk about Pinehurst for days. Give us a quick intro and what are the highlights also for you personally?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Obviously Pinehurst is located in North Carolina, just about 60 miles south of Raleigh. Pinehurst Resort and Country Club has 9 courses, a short course, the Cradle, 18-hole putting course, 3 hotels, and 11 dining outlets. We are a private club and also a resort. The membership encompasses roughly 5,000 members and about 1,500 golfing members. On an annual basis, all 9 courses will do roughly 300,000 rounds. With about 160,000 of those rounds being member rounds, and about 140,000 of those rounds being resort rounds. Probably one of the things that I cherish the most is that we've hosted one of the longest running amateur events in the country, the North-South Championship. Next year, it'll be our 120th running of it. Obviously, everybody knows Pinehurst number 2. That is our crown jewel designed by Donald Ross. He called it the fairest test of championship golf he ever designed. And it has served as more single championships. It's hosted more single championships than any other course in America. Recently, we just had, yes, I could go on, but recently we just had Gil Hance redesign course 4 for us to bring it back to what Donald Ross had originally envisioned. And we're very thrilled with that product coming back online.
I believe that it's already shooting out the lights in terms of the US accolades as a new course, right?
It is. It was ranked number 1 by Golf Magazine as the top new course you can play, and then just ranked number 2 on the Golf Digest 2019 Best New Courses list.
Fantastic. So it's back on the bucket list. You do have another tournament coming up now, just next week, right?
Well, it nearly seems of that. We have the 24 U.S. Open just in the distant horizon.
Nice. Matt, thank you so much. Give us a quick rundown of the courses that you are directly responsible for before we get jumping in and starting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, my direct responsibility is courses 1 through 6 and 8, all of our resort golf courses, and then oversee all of our, tournaments as well, such as, the North-South Championship, the Donald Ross Championship, and those are administered by our tournament director, Brian Fahey. Really, customer satisfaction is the bottom line on all of our resort courses, and really just try to make sure that our members and guests have a very pleasurable experience out of the course.
We're going to talk about Pinehurst's mission, which I'm very excited about you sharing. But before we do that, I want to also take a minute to quickly introduce Tagmarshal. So we are a golf course optimization system. This PGA show coming will be our number 6. So we've been around the block and we have now tracked 10 million rounds of golf. This still says 8, but every year exponentially this is growing, and there is a fantastic number of courses that are trusting us as partners, including your Oakmont, Valhalla, Eastlake, down in Atlanta, where our US offices are. I am a very German sounding, which is something that I cannot hide. So that's my background. We've got a European office in Cork, and we've got an office also in Cape Town, South Africa. There's a number of international facilities that we work with, including Carnoustie in Scotland, the home of the Open last season, and Ballybunion, and a few really nice ones also in Spain. But the majority of our customers are in the US. Pebble Beach is one of them. Matt, I believe that you used to work for Pebble, didn't you?
I did. I did a short little period out there for about 5.5 years.
Yeah, short. And then you escaped to the other side of the country. We work with European Tour. We're very excited. We worked with them on their Crown Jewel, which is a Wentworth event, and just started on the 2-year tech partnership. Also a number of other tournament organizations and a number of PGA sections as well. So there's a lot that we have been able to do in the time that we've been in play. And what's very interesting is while we have these fantastic courses that obviously we're very proud of, most of our courses are really the $50 round fee or the good, decent private club that don't necessarily make the top 100, but they're obviously responsible for the majority of the golf that gets played. So we also want to make sure that our system adds value there because that's where it's the most used, and we want to also bring back the educational content, much like today with Matt, so that the clubs down the road and the clubs that are not a major host can get some insight and can get some takeaways. Matt, what I would like to do is just set the base a little bit with some research that's come out of the USGA's Innovation Symposium. And we've spoken about this, so I'll prompt you here or there, but the USGA realizes that there is a net negative balance in the amount of people that are leaving the game versus the amount of people that are joining the game. It's not huge, but it's a bit of a slow bleed. And golf needs to really work hard if it wants to be relevant going forward. And there are two key components to this. One is we need a reduction in the consumption of resources because it's becoming more and more expensive to run a golf operation, and also expectations from players are growing every season. And the other part is we want our players happy so that we can attract new ones and that we can retain the ones that we have as part of the game. So the challenge to industry has a 20% increase in golfer satisfaction by 2025. So those two things are important for future-proofing the game. But if we're putting these numbers down, it would make sense, obviously, that we need to benchmark and we need to know what is important. So the USGA has set out to do some really groundbreaking research that was done by Professor Christina Schoonhoven and Eric Gray from the University of Wisconsin-Start. Now, Chris Schoonhoven is not only a researcher, she's also the Director of Operations at Erin Hills. So she knows her golf ops really well. And they, over the course of last year, has interviewed 15,000 players and many operators, and did a lot of movement tracking also, where they decided to use our system and the data that was spit out. And they defined 1,000 touch points in the golf experience to really understand what is important as part of the experience, and what is it that drives the bus as far as golfer happiness is concerned, but also what makes people unhappy, and what is it that we need to work on or try and avoid. And that research is ranked in classification attributes across perfect frustrator all the way to perfect delighter. This makes my day. This is what I'm going to talk about. Or it ruins my day, and I'm also going to talk about it. So the circle of life here goes across engage, arrive, playing the round, exit, including restaurant and so on, and extend means the club now calls on the player to please come back. What we suggested to the profs was to maybe adjust that a little bit and make the golf bigger. Would you agree, Matt, that golf needs to have the major chunk of the circle because it's the key that this whole thing happens?
Yeah, I certainly would agree with that. The majority of an individual's time, if they spend, say 6-7 hours at a facility, over 50% of that time spent on the golf course.
And also, we arrive at the location because we want to get on the course, and we're coming off the course to get in the restaurant. So it is key, and you probably would say it drives the bus, right?
Oh, hands down, it certainly does.
So what the research found was there's some on-course frustrators that it really pays to pay attention to, because we're all human, and we've got this bias that we tend to remember the bad things and talk about the bad things rather than the good things. So there's some key aspects in that research that's come out, and because we're human, we talk about the bad things. That I want to also start there. The absolute worst thing that you can do to a player, and you know this as a player yourself, Matt. I am a bumbling player and getting started with the game, but I know from my fellow players that I play with that this is always hugely emotional. Other speed is bottom of the list, and also corrective pace of play actions that gets the overall worst score. So anything that you could possibly do to a player, including the fairways not being in good nick, or people not repairing the divots, or whatever the case might be, that's all pales in significance to if the pace is bad or if corrective pace of play action is taken. And with that comes the marshal and ranger role in general, because that's perceived as negative, and the marshal and ranger placement is perceived as bad, because most people tend to think that, well, it's not us, it's the guys in front of us that are holding us up, and now the marshal's coming and having a go at me, and I don't think that it's my fault. So this is hugely emotional, and a lot of players get very upset when they're being called slow. So that is where corrective pace of play action comes in. On the other hand, positive ranger etiquette ranks as absolute top. So out of all the amazing things that you can serve up to a player, if you're doing that, that scores top marks. And who would have thought? Then the green and open tee, meaning I can go and tee and play. I don't have to wait. Overall playing speed are all highly ranking. Drinks carts, a good caddy, obviously conditioning are good things. But it's really interesting to see that the pace and marshal related factors are so polar. In the game, like in your experience, is that something, Matt, when it comes to complaints potentially, not just at Pinehurst, but also where you've worked before, but also when it comes to compliments, what normally comes back? Do you often see that this is aligned with this?
Yeah, so the delivery is everything. When the way the ranger or marshal approaches a group. As you can see, the positive ranger etiquette's at the top, comparative to, the ranger's role is at the bottom. If a ranger or marshal goes up to a group and simply tells them, hey, you're slow, you need to hurry up, without, giving them an explanation or saying, hey, guys, I know you probably had a, tough past hole, you're a little bit out of position, a couple pars and birdies on this next hole is going to get you right back in position. Spinning it into more of a positive light instead of more of an accusatory, light is always going to get you further and a more positive outcome.
So that's where the etiquette comes in. There's further research that comes from a company that does post-round surveys, and they found that the 3 key ingredients to what they call a high net promoter score. And the net promoter score that all the listeners would be familiar with. It's basically if your airline or your service provider asks you how likely are you to recommend the service or product to your peers or to your friends or colleagues, and normally the ranking would be 0 to 10, with 0 being absolutely unlikely, I will say bad things about you, or 10 being I'm delighted. So a high net promoter score is good for business because those people are ultimately promoting the experience that they've had, and they will tell others about it. But also if it goes negative, it goes the other way. And airline is a great example, because how often have we complained about the airline, the food, the service, the flight delays, and all of those things? And it's no different on a golf course. So the 3 key ingredients is feeling welcome, good flow in the course, interesting enough, meeting on-course staff that make me feel welcome. And if I tick those boxes, there's a higher percentage of restaurant visits, and the net promoter score is really positive. That also speaks repeat play. If I don't do it well, and if I'm not quite feeling welcome as a player, the flow is not good, and I don't meet anyone out there, nobody seems to really care about me, that's negative net promoter score. So there's lots of reasons why the flow has a key role to play here, but also on-course staff. And again, a positive player assistant experience adds this on-course staff box that the players want to see tick. And that is a nice opportunity to really use that marshalling or ranger role in a positive way and really delight people. So Matt, at your course, and so what we want to do is really use that that illustration from that research to look at the player experience and how it goes from engage to arrival to obviously lots of on-course focus, exit and extend. So we'll use that as a guide, the booking, arrival, engage and arrive. How does it work at Pinehurst? You mentioned you've got actually a higher amount of member rounds than guest rounds, but obviously guest rounds are very important, certainly also commercially, I would think. And also you want to make sure that you retain your members, and there's a long queue of people who want to become a member. And one of the things that really stood out in the research that we've done in our conversation is Pinehurst's mission and how that really speaks so well to what you're looking to create. Why don't you give us an outline of that and also how you set expectations?
Yeah, thanks, Bodo. So our mission is, as the cradle of American golf, we honor timeless traditions and inspire legendary stories. One smile, one round, one moment at a time. And that right there really just kind of sets the expectation for what the guests should receive and how they should be treated when they arrive. So, it really all starts, when they arrive at the front door. We want them to be greeted and made to feel welcome and know that they're appreciated and we appreciate their business. From that, then it really goes into, kind of setting the expectations from a golf standpoint, when they check into the golf shop, making sure that, they're relayed the correct information, that they're being advised that they need to, arrive to the tee 15 minutes prior to tee off, and that then, will in turn that, the course then runs on time. Prior to, actually teeing off, the group is met by the starter, which kind of gives them, their tag for, Tagmarshal purposes, passes it along to their caddy, and then kind of gets them in queue, if you will, to go see the tee captain.
Matt, I would love to talk about that in more detail, but can you give us a little bit more of an outline of the 9 courses, what the setup is? And I believe it all goes back to one central clubhouse. So as a guest, there's a lot of new things to take in, and how do you make sure that people know their way around and feel like they know what they're doing rather than getting lost? What is that like? And also, I'm sure that your staff gets picked firmly in line with that amazing and very poetic mission that you have defined for yourselves.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Courses 1 through 5 all operate out of one clubhouse. So, for first-time guests, even repeat guests, it can certainly be overwhelming. As far as where your bags go, where the golf shop is, where the driving range is, where the first tee of course 2 is, where the first tee of course 4. So really, it's definitely being that customer service oriented facility. So when they do arrive at the front door, we give them simple directions, simple instructions as far as where the golf shop is, where they want to go, and then from that, then it correlates directly into setting the expectations to make sure that they enjoy their time with us on property.
And in terms of your guest play, I would assume that normally people would play maybe 2 or 3 rounds at the various courses and also stay with you. What's that setup like? And I believe there's multiple restaurants I remember from my last visit, and obviously the resort to stay at. What does the typical visit look like by one of your guests?
So your typical visit is going to be a resort package to where it's nearly all inclusive in a lot of rights. Of course, you have your merchandise, your alcohol and things of that nature that are ancillary. But what they'll do is they'll typically get on a 2 to 3 night golf package. A 2 night, they'll typically play 3 rounds of golf. 3 nights, they'll typically play 4 rounds of golf. That includes lodging, breakfast, and dinner at one of our dining outlets. But majority of our resort guests, when they're traveling from near or far, will typically play, courses 2, 4, and 8. Obviously throw in the cradle, because if you haven't seen, it's just, it's 789 yards, just a phenomenal time. And our motto out there on the cradle is fun. So typical guests will play, 2, 4, and 8, and then sometimes throw in, kind of one of our classic courses. 3 has been really popular lately with some of the redesign that we've put into it, with really the sandscapes and again, bring Pinehurst back to what Donald Ross had originally intended.
Lovely. You mentioned just now that you have quite a particular setup when it comes to starting off the golf in the best possible way. So there's a number of courses that I would normally play as a guest. It's all new to me, and some guests might feel a little bit intimidated, and maybe that's the first time that they're playing a championship course, so they've got high expectations and getting a bit nervous here. So how do you make sure that you set expectations and they don't forget that they're here to enjoy themselves and play golf? You mentioned that you've got a setup that includes a starter and then a tee captain. How does that work? And also the importance of timings around this.
Yeah, and this is really based upon, the volume of play, plus, the fact of making sure that individuals tee off on time and how important that is to the flow of the golf course. With the facility as large as we are, when we have caddies, individuals playing in a group that might not necessarily know one another, it's key to have one individual that kind of, lack of better words, wrangles the group together. So that's what our starter does. The starter, makes sure that the group's paid, that the caddies are there, gets the group together 15 minutes prior to their tee time, kind of goes over a few things, passes out the tag, gives it either to a caddy if a caddy's in the group, or places it in the card if there's no caddy in the group. The starter will then pass along the group to the tee captain 8 minutes prior to tee off. So that's more or less 2 minutes after the group is in front of them is already teed off. The starter will then push them down to the tee captain, which is actually standing in between the tee box. The tee captain will then explain, what our pace of play is for the day, whether it's 4.5 or under that, but then also give them history of the golf course, and then send them off on the golf course with a fond farewell. And that is really, kind of the nuts and bolts of it, but the reasons for it are really to make sure that, each tee time tees off, plus or minus 30 seconds between their actual starting time, because that's so critical to the flow of the golf course.
Matt, from our data that we're collecting and the many hundred courses that we work with, we also realize that is often the first variable that we're looking to start improving, because you mentioned that it's key to the flow, but if we take a 10 or a 9-minute interval as an example, if there is not that discipline that you obviously put a lot of emphasis in creating and making it part of the tee off experience almost. If there's not that discipline, it very often happens that a group arrives a little bit late, and then we'll send them out 2 minutes late, and the next group arrives a little bit early, and they're ready to play. We'll send them out a little bit early. How bad can it be? But all of a sudden, we've reduced the 8 or 10-minute interval or 9-minute interval by 3 minutes, and that obviously has a major impact later on, especially on the shorter holes. So that we are creating wait times from the get-go. So that's why it's you're putting such an emphasis on doing that right. Is that something that you have always done? I'm sure you have, but has the use of the Tagmarshal technology confirmed the importance of it, and have you adjusted your process around that?
No, you kind of teed me up for this one, which is absolutely perfect, because when Gil Hance redesigned Course 4, in 2017, 2018 for us. We opened it back up in the fall of 18, and we're running on 9-minute intervals. We quickly identified with, the Tagmarshal system that it was an absolute pace of play killer for us. The T captain couldn't necessarily stay on time. He was, getting a minute or two behind. And then just as you were describing, a group was ready to go, was sending them out, trying to catch back up, creating for really, maybe a 7 to 8 minute interval, and, creating for a lot of unnecessary delays out on the golf course. So once we, identified that that was, an issue, we in turn, shifted the intervals to 10 minutes and really created for a lot better pace of play, right off the bat once we did that.
Nice. So I know that is something that the USGA is in favor of, just to increase tee time intervals. And there's some clubs that go to the extreme and make that 15 minutes. That obviously has a huge impact on the available capacity. So it costs a lot of money to do that. So that is where we're finding often that with improved management control and improved oversight that technology provides, but also better processes that you can track. And we're going to talk about that just now, Matt. Often clubs might have a bit of a dynamic stance on tee time. So at certain times of the day, it's a little bit more, and certain times of the day, it's a little bit less. And some clubs even, with the system that we provide, deploy dynamic goal times so that they start the day a bit quicker. And if they do that, sometimes that's 40, 50 minutes quicker. They can also reduce the intervals. So that way you can get your capacity back on track. But that is obviously a huge factor. At the same time, nobody is being helped if we're squeezing 7 or 8 minute intervals out and nobody is leaving the course happy. We may have artificially created more capacity, but we're hurting ourselves in the long run. So we need to find the right balance. And in order for us to understand what that is, it pays to have data, and it pays to have real tangible information. And I want to jump with that now with you, Matt. You mentioned handout of the Tagmarshal tag. So here's how that works from a system schematic point of view. Do you want to just quickly talk to that and how your team does that at Pinehurst and how they experience that?
Absolutely. So each one of our golf courses has a starter shack. So that's where we store our, our GPS units, as well as, have our chargers for our tablets. So each morning the starter then, in turns, gets all the tags in order, in sequence of the way that we want the tags to go out for that particular day. Again, the groups arrive to the tee 15 minutes prior. They end up passing along the tag to either a caddy, or if the caddy's not in the group, they'll then simply place it in the golf cart. Once the players tee off in that first hole, then we have more or less 360 coverage of them for their entire round.
Nice. So I'm going to show just now what that looks like for your team. So the hardware handout is the one side, but then that information gets sent and processed in the system. And obviously that's where the software really kicks in. And the nice thing for us is that the software keeps getting smarter the more rounds we feed into on a course by course basis, but also overall, because with a billion data points, there's a lot of predictive analysis and things that we can now add. The on-course, the range assistant, the pace manager, how do they see the system? You mentioned 360 line of sight. So how do they get to see that? And also, what do you guys see in the clubhouse?
Yeah, so the way that we end up doing this is we do have a pace of play manager, which oversees both courses 2 and 4's pace of play, and then we also have 2 rangers on each golf course. Each one of them is equipped with a tablet that they can see all the devices, again from a 360-degree vantage point. We also have each computer in the golf shop on with both courses. So, for instance, if one of the golf professionals in the golf shop or in the back office sees a group starting to become an issue, they're able to radio out to either the pace of play manager or a ranger, because it's not necessarily just the individuals on the course responsibility. The way that we view it is it's all of ours in the golf operations responsibility as far as pace of play goes. So we're able to have more than just, 3-4 sets of eyes on it. Every individual that's working has the capability of being able to see what's going on the golf course at any given time. A neat thing about that as well is, with the Tagmarshal GPS units, you're able to switch those over into a ranger or marshal mode. So you know where the pace of play manager is or the ranger is at any specific time. So if our individuals in the golf shop or the back office see a trouble area, but they see the ranger is out there, they can simply just radio out to make sure that they are in that zone or in that particular area without, having to tell them to go to that specific location.
Nice, thanks, Matt. I think what we'll do is we'll take a quick look at what your team might see on any given day. So on the right, obviously, that's Pinehurst number 2, the crown jewel, as you call it. Here's an example course. And just to quickly explain the difference between seeing groups and actually having intelligent information on each group, that's basically what you're seeing here. So these groups are all groups that are out on the course, but we can't really tell whether there are any issues or not unless there's some intelligence that gets thrown behind it, and that's what Tagmarshal does at any given moment. So your team would now see that as these groups are moving, that group number 17 is starting to cause an issue. What can you read from this picture, Matt? Obviously, I don't know to what extent you are part of the day-to-day rangering, probably not as much, but seeing that you've got the screens up, now you would radio and say, hey, number 1, that's your marshal. You probably want to go have a chat to group number 17.
Let's get over to 5 green. We need to talk to tag 17. Looks like they're starting to slow the course down. And as you can see, the different colors of the tags will then show different meanings of whether they're slow, delaying the golf course, they're slow but not delaying anyone. And typically, the larger the icon gets, the more troublesome they are.
So in this example, you've got group number 17 on the 5th. They're already holding up 2 groups behind them, and the system's calculated that their trend is bad, so they're going to get worse according to that trend. So what you or your marshal can now do is literally click on this group, and you can see a whole different range of additional information. For instance, many of our courses have got a T-sheet integration, so we now know the names of the people, so that makes a personal interaction easier. Then this shows you that they're currently 6 minutes off the pace, but the key is that their progress is the first 2 holes they were doing fine, and then they started to drop off, and they probably lost the ball now on the 5th, which as a combination is now impacting those groups behind them. And the nice thing is you would know that from the pro shop without even being out there. And so would anyone else who's got access to the system. And I believe that that's actually allowed you to do what, we would hope is a better job with less resources, because in the past you used to have more staffers out there to try and look for gaps and so on. Is that right?
It is, now from of course, our standpoint, we, are a large resort, so we're able to actually, have that staff on the golf course. But if we were a single facility, 18 holes, you might not necessarily even have to have a ranger anymore. Maybe you added a additional golf professional or additional golf shop assistant that, is more valuable in a lot of different areas than just an individual specific to the golf course, because now this individual might be able to check guests in, but you have an additional body, around the facility that if you do see a trouble group, you can simply ride out there and know where that trouble spot is.
That is a great point. And again, and thank you for bringing this back to the course down the road's perspective. And that's how a lot of our partners use the system. They're saying, well, we can get more done with less people. Also the data, and we're going to talk about that a bit later. I know that's one of your favorite parts of the system. It really shows you what are the days, what are the times that you need to keep an eye, what are the areas that you want to be proactive around, and then the rest of the day that person can fulfill other more high value duties around the pro shop, for instance. There are two things I would like to ask you, Matt. One is, I believe that you've got drinks carts out there, and you using the line of sight to get them in play better, and also provide better guest and member services as far as that's concerned. And then very, very importantly, and I'm sorry to ask two questions at once, what do you say now to that group 17, or what does your play assistant or ranger now go and say, knowing that that needs to be done with tact and that needs to be done well, so that we don't we need to balance what we tell this group, but also we need to make sure that we get them back in position so we don't impact all the groups behind them. So those are the two things: the drinks carts and what's the etiquette that you guys have to find at Pinehurst, and how do you actually talk and convey that message?
Okay, yeah. So I'll answer the second one first, where, again, it all comes back down to delivery. How is the group playing? When the ranger or marshal goes out there, they need to really fill out the group, but they do have concrete evidence showing that the past 3 holes for this particular tag, the past 3 holes, they've struggled a little bit. So, one might be just a simple, hey, good morning, how's everyone doing? I see that you teed off at 8:53. Currently, guys, we're just running just a touch behind. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stay with you, rake a few bunkers, and see if I can help you get back in position. See how the group responds to that. If they're receptive to it, great. If they're in the fashion of, we prefer you to leave us alone, no problem. I tell you, you guys, just if you don't mind, try to make a couple pars and birdies on this hole, and get you caught up. I'll check back with you in the next 2 holes. So see if they give them the opportunity to kind of self-correct.
That's nice, Matt. I think we need to just point out this little silver bullet that you just mentioned. You never once in that little conversation said to the players they're slow, which is, like we mentioned, is something that they're generally very defensive and sensitive about. But the key is to say that you're out of position, which gives them a target. Okay, we need to be in a different position. Tell us where it is. We'll get there. And you haven't now said anything about us as people or about our player ability. It's simply information that has been shared. And would your team then also sometimes actually show them on the map, and does that help the conversation?
They would, all depending upon the receptiveness of the group and the timing of it. So if they're actually coming off the green, going to an XT box, and they have the availability to show them the tablet as far as where they are on the golf course, we will. But our primary focus is to make sure that they understand that we're there to help them and not create any sort of animosity. And just as you were saying, we're able to use concrete evidence instead of emotional or subjective thoughts.
Matt, one of the things that is very important at Pinehurst is that you want to set the standards early, and you want to set expectations early. So you're actually placing your team out there to have an engagement early on, and then again about 45 minutes later. So you're always on top of things, and you're using those engagements for positive messages, but also to add service. Like we mentioned, the drinks cart. How do you do that? And what are the areas that you feel are the highest impact for your team that's out on the course?
No, that's great. And that's a perfect segue into that first question that you asked, as far as, how are we able to determine, the beverage carts? What are we using Tagmarshal for the beverage carts? We are able to tag the beverage carts with tags, so we can see that they're a beverage cart, or we know exactly what number tag they are. And in turn, a group ends up coming by. The ranger says, hey, I haven't seen a beverage cart, or hey, we would like a drink. That ranger can then say, if they're on the 5th hole and he sees the beverage cart on the 6th hole, he can logically tell the group, hey, you're going to see the beverage cart in about 10 minutes. Or if the beverage cart's on hole 12, he can then radio or call to the beverage cart to come over to the 6th hole to greet that group coming off the 5th green. For us, as far as wanting to hit each group early, we found that's a very strong focus on building a relationship and setting expectations for the entire day. So Typically on course 2, when the group comes off of the third hole, they're greeted by either a ranger or a pace of play manager simply to check in with the group, say good morning, make sure that that their round's going good so far. And now, if the group is out of position, we will certainly mention to them, hey, you got a couple tough stretch of holes coming up, so do your best to stay up with the group in front of you. With 4, 5, and 6 being our longest running holes on the golf course, we know this is, again, a good touch point to hit them coming off the third hole. So once they then come off the 5th green, we're able to speak with them knowledgeably again as far as knowing that they just went through a tough stretch of holes and the golf course is going to get easier. So if they are out of position, we've made a nice touch point on hole 3 that when they come off of the 5th or 6th hole, they're more receptive to picking up the pace of play or taking guidance from that specific individual.
Nice. And that, as you're saying, is strategic is a good position because you can catch the groups going the one way and then coming back the other way. And if you have a positive engagement early on, and that in most instances would be encouraging because your player assistants that is out there, you're looking after experience, they would know the pace information for that group, and they can just have an appropriate conversation that is positive and not in the classic marshalling sense would be, I'm not going to talk to that group because they seem to be okay. But I only talk to them if I think that they're out of position or if they're slow, and then I go and have a go potentially. So in your case, you're really using that opportunity strategically to have and build these relationships. And I think that's really nicely put from your side, and a great strategy to drive. Let me just jump ahead a little bit to the. Oh, sorry. I need to just also mention, if anyone has any questions, I've painted over your face now. No. Anyone has any questions, you can ask any questions in the chat. You can see Matt is super knowledgeable and engaged, so I'm sure he'd welcome that. And also, even if you have or have not played Pinehurst or have had experiences like he's mentioned, and can verify the effectiveness or disprove that, please shout. We'd love to have your opinion or your questions. One of the things that we mentioned, Matt, was the benchmarking, the data that the system gives you. And I know it's something that's very important for you as a manager. So I'd love to I'll just spend a bit of time on how you use it to manage your resources and to allocation, to manage performance. How often do you look at it? What do you look at? I've got a full screen, so we can jump to that. Just share a little bit of what that has done for you and the course that you're tracking and collecting data on at Pinehurst.
Yeah, now this is probably one of my favorite pieces of the software is the data that you're able to collect. One of the things that we do on a daily basis from a Tagmarshal standpoint is, we determine the fastest round of the day, the slowest round of the day, and then the average round of the days, captured. We're then able to put that into a pace of play report, if you will. So we then have concrete data backing up our pace of play report. And then we have our pace of play manager put in a very subjective point of view, if you will. So this is extremely helpful. And, just as you're saying with guest comments and, our MPS, this is extremely helpful for when we get guest comments about pace of play, because then we're able to go back on our daily pace of play reports and see what actually transpired comparative to what the guest perceptions was. Then when we have that follow-up call or follow-up conversation with the guest, we're more knowledgeable and prepared to be able to handle that conversation and speak, accurate on what transpired.
Here's one example day. Obviously, we picked a success case. It's not always easy, but this was 25th of September. Reasonably good weather, actually really nice warm weather, so nice conditions, and you've had a busy course. So what this shows is the individual tee times right throughout the day, and the blue line is your pace expectations. That's your goal time, and you're showing that you're overperforming really nicely. So what does this tell you? And also, what are you learning from looking at the whole performance, especially over time? And are you using this pace distribution that looks at how many of our rounds were on pace with the 10 minutes versus 20 versus 30 minutes over as a guide of measuring your success?
Yeah, we certainly look at the pace distribution, down at the bottom right-hand corner, as far as a matrix of success, if you will. Obviously, the more rounds on pace, the less rounds between 30 and 40 minutes over over 40 minutes is optimal. Probably one of the biggest statistics that we use on a daily basis would be our hole stats. Since we're able to figure out exactly what each hole's runtime or average runtime is, for each golf course, it really helps us, set it up strategically when we know that the tee sheet is maxed out or we have a large outing for that particular day. It helps us see exactly where we want to set the tees, and we're able to see really differences between 2 minutes on a particular runtime of the hole when we have tees set in certain fashions. It's not necessarily always just moving tees forward. A prime example would be the second hole of course 4 as a par 5. When we move the tees back a considerable amount, we see the runtime of that hole actually decrease. It is a par 5, so it really negates individuals from going for that green in 2. So we're able to see a more even flow for that particular hole throughout the day, therefore, dropping that particular runtime for that specific hole.
Nice. So you can really go and run a number of rounds through and understand a certain setup with a certain play volume, and then also learn from this is an appropriate setup for the weather and volume we've got tomorrow. And then your greenkeepers would action that. And there's a engagement going two ways, just so you can provide the best possible outcome and experience, right?
Absolutely. So it's definitely an engagement between the professional staff and the superintendent staff to make sure that the course is set up in an appropriate manner to achieve the goals that are set forth.
Nice, thank you, Matt. So here's what we call a track map, which is a historic view of one particular round. That is one of the slower rounds on your second. And so sometimes you might look at that, especially if you're looking at, was my team successful in rectifying that, or every now and then, and I hope that doesn't happen often, you might have a customer or a member that really wants to take a closer look at the round that they've played. And sometimes the perception is, it's taken me 17 hours. Meanwhile, they were 5 minutes over. So again, like the evidence, the actual data is very helpful. Do you use that as well here or there, also to look at a performance of your team and benchmarking that?
Absolutely, and that's kind of where I was going to go with this particular screen is able to benchmark the staff and see where our interactions were at, and did we help assist these individuals pick up the pace of play when they slowed down. And for this particular screenshot, I would look at, okay, where are they being delayed, how long were they delayers, and then once they start being delayed, I would like to see within, I would call it 2 holes, that there's a Marshall note in there. And currently there's not one on that particular screen, but we're big advocates of making sure that we do put notes in the system, so that when we do click on a backdated round, we're able to see when those interactions took place.
That is a very good metric to really check. Also, is our team on top of it? And you mentioned your goal is to have an interaction within 2 holes of somebody falling out, and you can see that here. Hole number 3, they were racing and maybe they played a fantastic score and got lucky, or in hole number 4 they really 7 minutes off. and then they had a bit of a stretch here of some bad holes. So it's really interesting what you can see historically, but also without obviously being on top of people and having to have pen and paper notes. We've got a few more minutes, and we want to make sure that we stay on pace, Matt. So I saw that there was one question coming through, and let me just quickly pick that up, if you don't mind. How much communication do you have about your expectation of the players before play, and do you explain to them how and why they're being monitored? That is a good question, because one of the questions that we sometimes get asked is, so what are the players, how do they feel about technology being out there and being monitored? And so how do you communicate, and how do you explain that? And what's the reception, I suppose?
No, absolutely. So, people do ask, what is that tag, or, what are you giving our caddies, or what are you putting in our cart? And we simply explain to them that, we have Tagmarshal, what is a GPS pace of play management system. And we do that, to ensure that your round is enjoyable and smooth out there on the golf course. We don't ever really get any negative feedback from that. Initially the caddies were a little skeptical, thought Big Brother was watching them, and so on and so forth. But rest assured, they've all bought into it and understand that it's simply a pace of play management system. But
sure, a quick round for the caddy is good, and a happy customer for the caddy means more tips potentially. So I would think they would buy into it.
But then from an expectation standpoint, it certainly has to be set for all of our guests. It starts when they check into the golf shop, again, to make sure that they arrive 15 minutes prior to the first tee. And then, prior to tee off, they are certainly, communicated what the expectation for pace of play for their particular round is. The majority of our rounds, we do say 4.5 hours or less. And then we also list out that we are going to have on-course rangers and pace of play managers out there that are out there to help them and assist them, not necessarily, bog them down with, being strict on pace of play, because they understand that is very important to us with, as much emphasis as we're already putting on it, but rather that those individuals are out there to assist them in having an enjoyable round.
Nice. I think that you're sharing that with most of the operators that we work with. It's not a case of we have a pace of play problem, but rather we have an opportunity to really provide the best possible experience. And also our players care about it. They care that their time is being valued, and also their experience is being valued. So anyone who ticks those boxes will certainly get the benefit of looking to better manage it. There was one more question. Was there ever any guest resistance on carrying the tag? How do you manage the distribution collection? I think we've answered the first one. How do you manage the distribution collection of tags for walkers? Because, and maybe if you'll allow me, the Tagmarshal tags, or we do have a version that we can just install into carts, so they're out of sight and they don't need to be touched. If you have a big caddy program and walking golf, obviously then you would use a system like it's being used at Pinehurst. We do have a two-way system as well that comes with GPS screens. Those obviously get installed too into the carts, and we do have a two-way walker that has a screen option. We've seen it earlier. But how do you manage it and make sure that the tags come back? I would think that's probably part of the question. Is that something that's working seamlessly?
For the most part, it is. From a caddy standpoint, we do ask that the caddies carry them in their bibs, not necessarily the players' bags. We have had instances where the caddy will either clip it onto a player's bag, ends up in Texas, and we end up having to contact the player. The player will ship it back to us. So there are some one-offs in that instance, but as far as for guests that might not necessarily have a caddy, we simply put it in the cart, and then our actual cart team collects the tags and then puts them back in the starter shack.
Okay.
Course number 4, we do have an individual that actually greets individuals off the 18th green. So as they come off the 18th green, they ask how their round was. Again, adds a additional touch point for the guest, and then we collect the tag there.
Nice. What we normally do with the courses that are a bit less staffed, we do have a collection box at the end of the hall and some signage. And also there is a geofencing setup that would send an alert if a tag goes into certain areas not supposed to go. Obviously that works really well when it comes to managing cart movement, but also if a walking tag is on a bag and goes towards a car park where you don't want it to go, then the system will generate an alert that can go all the way up to an automated phone call to reception or to a designated number, just to make sure that the tag comes back. But again, like if you're setting expectations and if there's some signage and if people know what they're in for, normally it's not a problem to manage. Quickly, Matt, and we're really nicely on pace here. The post round, how do you measure success against your mission? How do you benchmark? There is one particular point that I think is very important to you, that basically you're saying your post round sentiment is the on-course sentiment. So the on-course experience is basically what people are taking away from it. What are the commercial benefits of providing a positive player experience? And are there any mechanics that you use to track you were successful, like surveys or anything like that? How do you manage the post round, and what are your goals for it?
I believe that the benefits to a positive player experience are really endless. It starts with improved player loyalty, resulting in repeating business. Players certainly become advocates of your brand, encourage others to visit. Reality, that's just free publicity. Kind of metrics that we use to determine our success rate is we do use NPS, Net Promoter Score. So each one of our resort guests, whenever they leave property, they do get a survey, and we send them requesting feedback. We get positives, negatives, and things to improve on. So that's certainly a way to see what our guests are saying about us and what we're doing good, what we should improve on. And then obviously the use of Tagmarshal certainly measure our success rate. If we're constantly having rounds below our set forth matrix, then obviously we're doing well. And if we're having rounds constantly above our matrix, we need to go back to the drawing board and see what we need to do to improve or get those numbers below the matrix.
One of the challenges that you have obviously is that the expectations are super high coming to Pinehurst or a facility like yours. So it really pays to control the controllables as much as you can. But going back to the course down the road, the club down the road, would you say, and would you agree with the sentiment that the front of house in terms of service is actually out on the course, and that it pays to really focus on those interactions and managing the on-course experiences as well as possible?
Hands down, it does. I mean, the on-course experience, certainly correlates directly to, the post-round sentiment. With Tagmarshal and this on-course experience, you're able to be proactive instead of reactive, and your customers and guests will see that. So it's certainly beneficial to the longevity of an operation.
So what we find often is there's a direct correlation also between better control of play and with all those factors that you mentioned, including setup adjustments and so on, that would ultimately lead to additional capacity being freed up. So some of the courses, it's almost a byproduct, but obviously it's a very welcome byproduct because that's worth additional green fees. But often what we find is, and the data obviously confirms that too, is that if you have 200 players out there and you're saving them 20 minutes on average, that is 60 hours that we saved that group of players on any day. And that's 60 hours that those people can now spend in the pro shop and in food and beverage and post round, and they leave the course happier. So there's a really big and direct correlation also with managing the on-course experience well, having happier people come off it. They have more time available to spend with you, and that is the course down the road. So you certainly have people's attention as far as they're spending a number of days with you, but the course down the road may not have that. And for the standard golfer, for them to find the time to play is tough enough. So we need to make sure that we do it well, and there's commercial benefits at the end of it. And you're saying that ultimately that's the calling card, and that's what people remember. And well done to you and the team at Pinehurst for really being true to your mission and creating these memorable experiences. I haven't had a chance to play. That's the curse of people working in golf. I was there, and I met you and the team, obviously, and some of our team have been there, but I don't think any one of us have ever played. Hopefully soon. Yeah, we really appreciate your time today and the insight. Thank you so much, Matt. It's been great. And thanks everyone also who's asked questions, and hope to check in with you at the PGA show in Orlando.
That's great, Bodo. Thank you so much, and happy holidays to all of you.
Thanks. We'll see you at our stand. What's the number, Natalie?
3023.
3023. same as last year. Matt, again, thanks so much for your time. It's been a huge pleasure, and really interesting how you guys have taken the on-course experience to the next level.